'cause I'm on top of the world. Hey, I'm on top of the world. Hey, waiting on this for a while now. Paying my dues to the dirt.
So I suppose I first really got into science at the tender age of 3. My parents just kind of shoved this Coke and Mentos volcano towards me, and it kind of exploded, resulting in me and my brother getting all sicky and having to take a bath later. However, that realization of how science could explain this giant explosion of kind of frothy Coke that exploded all over us really sparked a lifelong interest in science, because I realized that science is how we explain our natural world. And then when I seriously got into science was in 6th grade. And that was because it was my very first science fair. And of course, I wanted to do amazing at it because the year before, my brother had also won the science fair. So of course, the sibling rivalry came along, and I had to do well as well. And so my first project, it was a civil engineering project about making what are called low-head dams, making them safer for people around them. And so I entered into this science fair, and it was kind of, instead of a science fair, it was more like the Hunger Games. I mean, they dangled $10,000 in front of 300 kind of rabid middle schoolers and said, whoever wins gets a laptop. So that was my kind of introduction to science, and over the next 3 years, I'm proud to say I walked away with 3 laptops, and as I grew up, so did my projects. I grew from civil engineering to environmental projects with environmental biosensors and nanomaterials. However, then my interest in science took a sudden and drastic turn. And that happened when I was 13, when a close family friend, who's like an uncle to me, actually passed away from pancreatic cancer. And when the disease hit so close to home, I knew I needed to learn more. So I went online to find answers. And using Google and Wikipedia, I found a variety of statistics on pancreatic cancer. And what I had found really shocked me. You see, over 85% of all pancreatic cancers are diagnosed late, when someone has less than a 2% chance of survival. And as I dug deeper, I found that the underlying cause from this was that we currently really don't have a reliable diagnostic test that we can screen the general population for the cancer. I mean, with breast cancer, we have a mammogram. With the prostate cancer, we have that really awkward exam that all of the men kind of dread. And then for pancreatic cancer, there's absolutely nothing. And so due to this, all of them are diagnosed late when someone has less than a 2% chance of survival. I mean, our current diagnostic is a 60-year-old technique. I mean, that's older than my dad. But also it costs $800 and is grossly inaccurate, missing 30% of all cancers. And because of this, your doctor would have to be ridiculously suspicious that you had the cancer in order to give you this test. And I was like, there has to be a better way. So armed with 9th grade freshman biology, I decided to set out and change the face of cancer diagnostics. A bit lofty of a goal, however, I was going to do it. And then I did a bit more research, and I found what a sensor for pancreatic cancer would really have to look like in order to be effective. It would have to be inexpensive, rapid, simple, sensitive, selective, and minimally invasive. And I was pretty sure I could do this, however, I wasn't exactly sure how initially. And then I found out why we haven't updated our sensor in over 6 decades. And that's because when you're looking for the cancer, we're looking at your bloodstream, particularly for these changes and variations in protein levels. And while this sounds very straightforward, it's anything but. You see, because you have liters and liters of blood, and you're looking for this minuscule difference in this tiny amount of protein, so it's next to impossible. It's like trying to find a needle in a stack of nearly identical needles. However, undeterred due to my teenage optimism, or how some people like to label it, complete and utter ignorance of the entire field of cancer research, I went back online to any teenager's best sources for information, Google, Wikipedia, how I get through every high school test and quiz. And I found a database of over 8,000 proteins that are found in your bloodstream when you have these cancers. And it was summer break. I had nothing else to do. I had a completely clear plate. And so I shut myself in my room and bashed out all 8,000 proteins. And at the end of the summer, I was really doubting my potential for any future social interaction, and it made for some very interesting back-to-school essays. My teacher asked my friend, for example, "Oh, what did you do over the summer?" "I went to Yellowstone Park," and that's just some stereotypical tourist attraction in America. While she asked me, "Jack, what did you do?" "I researched 8,000 proteins over the summer." Needless to say, there was this really awkward pause after that, and my class didn't really look at me in the same way. However, on the 4,000th try, when I was close to going insane, I finally found one protein that could work. And the name of this protein was called mesothelin. And it's just your ordinary run-of-the-mill type protein, unless, of course, you have pancreatic, ovarian, and lung cancer, in which case it's found these very high levels in your bloodstream. But the key is that it's found in the earliest stages of the disease, when someone has close to 100% chance of survival. So now that I located a protein that could potentially signify the presence of the cancer, I then shifted my focus to the real problem at hand, which was finding a reliable sensor for this protein, which would then indicate whether or not you had the cancer. And on this long, epic journey that I underwent finding a new way to detect pancreatic cancer, I had one really amazing epiphany moment that occurred in the most unlikely of places. High school biology class, absolute stifler of innovation. Particularly with my high school biology teacher, we didn't particularly get along. And so one day it escalated to the point where I was blatantly ignoring instruction and rebelled how any self-respecting teenager would by sneaking in an article on single-walled carbon nanotubes. And these are long, thin tubes of carbon that are an atom thick, and they're 1/50,000th the diameter of your hair. So they're extremely small. And they have these very incredible properties. They're kind of like the superheroes of material science. So while I was kind of suavely reading this article wedged into my textbook under my desk, we were learning about this certain class of molecules called antibodies. And antibodies are molecules that only react with one specific protein. In this case, the cancer biomarker mesothelin. And I was just sitting there in class reading about all these properties of nanotubes while listening to this lecture about antibodies, when all of a sudden it hit me. These two concepts can be combined. You see, you take this antibody and weave it into this network of nanotubes, such that you have a network that only reacts with one specific protein. But also, due to the incredible properties of carbon nanotubes, the network will actually change how electricity flows through it based on how much protein is present, and thus indicate the presence of pancreatic cancer. And this is kind of analogous to having a bundle of wires and slowly stretching it apart. And as you stretch it apart, there are less connections between the wires, and thus less pathways for the electricity to take, and thus electrical resistance will increase throughout over the duration of the network. And there's one catch about this. You see, these networks of nanotubes, they're very flimsy. And since they're so delicate, they need to be supported. So I chose to use paper. And making a paper sensor for pancreatic cancer is about as simple as making chocolate chip cookies, which I love. I mean, if I ever do bad on a test, you'd better watch out for the chocolate chip cookies or the ice cream, depending on how bad I did on that test. However, what you do is you start with some water, you pour in some nanotubes, add some antibodies, mix it up, take some paper, dip it, dry it, and then you can detect cancer. And as soon as I had this epiphany, I see my teacher, she's all red in the face, and especially has eyes on the back of her head because she whirls around, storms up to me, and snatches the article out of my hand, and it's like, what is this actual science doing in my biology class, which is for the regurgitation of mundaneness. However, or at least that was what I thought she said. She probably said something more along the lines of, you should be paying attention and doing your classwork or something like that. However, after class, I had to endure a 30-minute long speech about respecting myself and others, and eventually I got my article back and I could actually begin researching this promising idea. And as soon as I did, I realized I'm probably going to need a lab to do this research. I mean, I can't exactly do cancer research on my kitchen countertop. That wouldn't go over too well with my mom. I mean, me and my brother had done some pretty crazy stuff in the past. For example, we had mixed up high-grade explosives in our basement. We also cultured cholera and E. coli where we make sandwiches. Luckily, there wasn't an outbreak. And we even ordered uranium off of a very sketchy website. And you can't really blame us, though. I mean, it was 50% off. So we still have that kind of sitting in the bottom of our basement. We're not really sure what to do with it. However, cancer research wasn't going to fly. So I contacted 200 different professors at Johns Hopkins University and the National Institutes of Health, essentially begging them to let me get into their lab. And how I did this is I typed up a 32-page behemoth of a document outlining my procedure, materials list, timeline, all these different things. And then I emailed it to all these professors I found by essentially going one by one through the faculty lists on all these university sites and seeing what their research interests were. I kind of felt like a really bad Facebook stalker when I did that. However, I got over that guilt. And then I sat back waiting for all these positive emails to pour in from all of these professors. And then reality struck. I got 199 rejections out of 200 emails. And I realized professors aren't nearly as nice as those glowing profile pictures make them seem. They can actually be very mean at times and go line by line through my entire procedure, saying why each step was the worst possible mistake I could ever choose. However, I finally got one positive email from Dr. Andraka at Johns Hopkins University. And I go in for this big interview. I suppose sweatpants or hoodie wasn't the most professional of wear. And so I go in. However, despite this, I was expecting a standard interview, like what's your favorite color, what's your favorite class, stuff like that. Unfortunately, this guy had his PhD in medicine. I couldn't bamboozle him like my parents. I would just say something about mumbo-jumbo, protein kinetics, carbon nanotubes to my parents, and they'd understandingly nod and be like, OK, sure, Jack, go do that. However, this professor actually knew his stuff, and he brought 29 PhDs and stuffed them in a 3-meter by 3-meter room plus me, and just grilled every aspect of my project. And after an hour, I stumbled out. I had to guess on quite a lot of those questions. I always guess C like I do on my SATs. And I finally landed the lab space I needed. And as soon as I started, I realized I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I mean, first day, Jack, culture some cancer cells for us. I accidentally sneezed in the cancer cell flask. And I was like, cancer has an immune system. It's pretty hard to kill off. No, unfortunately, what happened is there are like tentacles growing out of that flask at the end of the day. So I just kind of hid that away. And over the course of the next 7 months, I probably committed cellular genocide. I fell over and broke the flask. I would bake them in the incubator or accidentally freeze them in the freezer. And I even blew up all of my cell media in the centrifuge once in a giant fountain of cell culture. I thought it was totally worth it. My lab professor at that point was just beyond like really believing me. It was like, Jack, what are you doing? However, I kind of persevered past that, and then I got to this procedure called the Western blot. And that's where you have to optimize the antibody to make sure that protein will only react with the one antibody. And that you need these very clear, distinct lines. And I got like first all blank, and then all black, and then I would have lines going all over the place. However, eventually, after 7 months of hard research and sometimes staying over in the lab for far too long, crying myself to sleep on a really thin mattress of scientific journals I had piled up while eating a Twix bar, I finally ended up with one small paper sensor that costs 3 cents and takes 5 minutes to run. This makes it 168 times faster, over 26,000 times less expensive, and over 400 times more sensitive than our current methods of detection. But also, it can detect the cancer potentially in the earliest stages, when someone has close to 100% chance of survival, and so far is over 90% accuracy. So in the next 2 to 5 years, this patent-pending sensor could potentially lift the once dismal pancreatic cancer survival rates from 5.5% to close to 100%, and would do similar for ovarian and lung cancer. But it wouldn't stop there. You see, you can switch out that antibody and detect an entirely different disease, ranging from Alzheimer's to other forms of cancer, even HIV, AIDS, and heart disease. The possibilities are literally endless. And as I see it, in the coming years, we're going to be experiencing a very fascinating trend in medicine. You see, with current initiatives such as the Nokia Biosensing X Prize to revolutionize biosensors medicine, the Tricore X Prize to develop handheld smartphone detection for different diseases, we're going to have this amazing era in medicine where we have this unprecedented knowledge and understanding of how our bodies work and how diseases interact with ourselves. And what's going to be really happening is we're going to see this paradigm shift in how we diagnose diseases. See, initially we started out with symptom-based diagnostics, where you'd say, okay, I have a runny throat, I have a fever, maybe it's the flu or something. However, this can also be way too general and very not accurate, bluntly. I mean, for example, I looked up my symptoms. Oh, I have a runny nose, sore throat. I could either be pregnant, be going through cocaine withdrawal, or have stage 4 bladder cancer, none of which I think is very likely. However, now we had shifted over probably in the mid-1900s to this phase called molecular-based diagnostics, where essentially we look at different proteins in your bloodstream and bodily fluids and see how those correspond to different diseases. And that's really beginning to take off, and we're shifting to where everyone is going to have access to this. Rather than being insanely expensive, like $800 per test, we're now seeing it go down to a few pennies. However, after this, we're going to see something very exciting, which is this kind of tricorder era, where we not only combine your proteome, which is all the protein expression in your entire body, but also connect that to your genome and the symptoms that you're presenting. And by combining all of these and seeing which diseases cause which to be expressed, then we're going to be able to understand diseases on an unprecedented level and be able to have much better medical diagnostics than previous. And this is extremely exciting to budding young scientists like myself, because just getting into this field, thinking of all the different biosensors that we can use and how these can expand not only in just medicine, but also to environmental applications and just a whole host of different applications in real life. And there's a couple of things that are kind of holding us back from this medical revolution. And the first of which was, on my journey, I faced a lot of difficulties. I mean, I got told no by all of these professors. I got told no by my biology teacher. I got told no even by my own parents. Luckily, they didn't tell me to make a paper mache volcano instead for my project. However, the largest difficulty I faced on this entire journey was closed access publishing. And that means that when you want to access an article, you have to cough up $35. And that's for 90% of all scientific journals out there. And because of this price, you have this insanely expensive cost to get into the field of scientific research. And so we've essentially created this very fundamental barrier between youth and general public and science, because the youth and general public simply can't access any of the scientific information. We can only access this very small sliver, 10% of the information that's open access. And we see all these big STEM initiatives that say we need more kids interested in science. However, when the new Katy Perry single costs 99 cents versus a seminal science article costs $35, that's a bit of a mixed message society's sending there. I mean, the world of science should be just as accessible as the world of pop culture, because if we don't, then we're just going to end up with a bunch of Miley Cyruses and Kim Kardashians twerking it out, and that's not going to solve the global health crisis. However, this isn't just a problem for 15-year-old cancer researchers. This is a problem for everyone. You see, recently, Harvard University released a statement that essentially boils down to saying that we simply don't have the funds to continue paying for our scientific subscriptions. They've just become too expensive. Because what's happened is the publishing business has really monopolized one of the most valuable human resources out there, which is scientific knowledge. They've completely cornered this market, and the scientists, we cannot do anything to bring these prices down. They can arbitrarily place prices at whatever level they feel so. And what does it say about the world of academic publishing, flow of information, and accessibility of knowledge when Harvard University, the richest academic institution in the world, can't afford to continue paying its subscriptions? I mean, we've essentially created this very rigid class system where at the top we have the knowledge elite, those big universities and corporate labs that can kind of afford these subscriptions. But also there's a stratification there. I mean, we have those big universities like Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, but also then we have state-level universities like Virginia Tech or University of Maryland that might not have as large of endowments as those big universities. So we're essentially saying, okay, to these top 10 institutions, you all can teach calculus, while the rest of you all, you're relegated to only teaching up to Algebra 1. And so we've discriminated access to information based on how much money and wealth you have, as well as where you work. And then we have the knowledge middle class, people like you or me. We have access to the internet, and we can read that small sliver of open access open access journals that are freely available to the public. However, below that is the knowledge underclass, those 5.5 billion people who don't have access to the internet whatsoever, and have this very knowledge, they can't access any scientific knowledge whatsoever. And so essentially we're living in a knowledge aristocracy, where only 0.008% of the world's population, that's how many people can access these scientific journals. So that's like choosing 80 people off the streets of New York City and saying, you guys are the only ones who can access scientific information. All of the other millions and millions of people, too bad for you. And we're leaving behind so much potential human capital there. We're leaving behind 5.5 billion people. Think, the next cure to cancer might be there. The next renewable solar strategy might be there. There are so many solutions that we could be throwing away by disregarding that 5.5 billion people. But imagine if we could live in a knowledge democracy, where whether you're from China to Cambodia, whether Malaysia to Mexico, whether you're a billionaire living on less than $1 a day, you'd have the exact same access to information. Because knowledge should not be, or science should not be a luxury, and knowledge should not be a commodity. It should be a basic human right. Because the minds of the people must be free, and that means the minds of everyone, not the minds of a select few who can afford these articles. And it's my belief that we're at this very unique position to create this change. Because if we don't, we're leaving behind all the next generation. We as scientists have the power to create this change because we're the people who are supplying this information. And should we choose to instead supply our information to only journals that have open access publishing policies, then the other journals will be forced to change their business strategy. Because we're living in the 21st century, going by a 16th century business model is just unacceptable at this point. Now, the second problem that we're encountering in the medical industry with moving medical innovation forward is the approval process. So from bench to bedside, it takes about 17 years. And in that 17 years, endless medical products, endless medical innovations are shot down ruthlessly simply because they don't have the funding necessary. You see, due to recent court decisions in the United States, for example, the cost of getting a project approved has exponentially increased because what that court ruling has really said is that essentially samples that are given to a doctor, let's say you have cancer and you're dying and you want to help move the field of cancer research forward. Well, when you donate that sample to your doctor, it won't belong to that doctor. It will instead belong to the institution they work at. So if that doctor moves, the samples don't move with him. And that means that for someone, when we want to get a medical product out there and test it on these different blood samples or different urine samples, that means we have to purchase them from the institution at a cost of about $5,000 per sample. And so that puts the cost of a large-scale clinical trial in the millions and millions of dollars. And that's simply not an option for the startup consumer culture. And what's really harsh about it as well is that we don't have a universal approval system. Each country has their own unique healthcare approval system, so you have to go country by country, which further compounds this problem. And so by solving these two problems, I believe that we can have this great medical revolution where diagnostics are kind of democratized around the world and where everyone has the exact same standard of diagnostics instead of only a select few wealthy nations having access to these diagnostics. So that's my goal, and I believe that as a society that we can achieve this because think, if a 15-year-old who didn't quite know what a pancreas was could find a new way to detect pancreatic cancer, just imagine what we all can do together. Thank you. All right. Question time, I think. Tweet at #AskJack, is it? Yes.
So we have time for some questions. Exactly. So you can still use the hashtag AskJack. We have time for a few questions. So I have it in front of me, so just live update. Thanks for the presentation.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. First question that I have in front of me, what are your future plans? Simple as that.
So my future plans. So at the moment, I'm working on a few different projects, the first of which is on water quality. And so what me and my friend have developed is a microfluidic chip that's about the size of a credit card.
Okay.
And it detects 6 different environmental contaminants simultaneously. And then we developed a water bottle filter, or a filter made out of recycled plastic water bottles that filters out 90% of all environmental contaminants in 5 minutes. And then you can reclaim those contaminants and sell them off to subsidize the cost of the filter. And then also I'm working on some diagnostic work as well. So.
Okay, so you're 17 right now, right? You're talking about these different things from like curing cancer to like water bottles, right? End goal throughout your lifetime. What is it that you want to solve?
So I just took my SATs, and so now I have to look at what college I want to go to and what I want to major in. I still have no clue what I want to do when I grow up, unfortunately. I don't know if it's like doctor or business or something with science that will help the world is my main goal.
Okay, so you talked a lot about accessibility and information being free and open. We have a question. How can you tackle science problems if lab and resources aren't available for you in like Lithuania, for example?
So actually, a lot of my projects I do in my basement with my brother. So for example, that water bottle project I did just at my school. And so there's a whole do-it-yourself movement that's out there where you use tools such as Arduino and different coding mechanisms to do these projects. And while you might not be able to do these super advanced biotechnology projects, it's becoming increasingly accessible where you can begin to code actually the genetic code because there are only 4 letters and you can actually code genes and put all of those together and then kind of export that to outsource that to different nations and different labs where they can do the actual like wet lab work, while you would only have to do the coding and stuff like that. So there's definitely different pathways that you can take to solving these different challenges. However, also you have to kind of balance that with actually doing it in the lab.
Okay. There's a question on IQ polls. If I can read it, which factor is the key to become a successful innovator? It's up to you to vote. Just get your mobile phones out there. So there's a number of initiatives like Coursera, MIT Open, edX, and all that. What's your take on that? Is that like a solution to everything, or?
Yeah, so massive online courses or MOOCs are definitely the way for the future education of the world. I mean, with those, you can teach so many different people, so many different topics. And so through those, we're going to have a much more educated base of consumers as well as people, innovators, such that everyone can begin to innovate. And so now the challenge is, instead of using the internet to educate people, we need to get internet access to people such that they can access those resources. And so I see that as one of the major barriers between us accessing those 5.5 billion innovators.
Okay. So you mentioned at the very beginning the reason why you got into science is because of a personal story. How big of a factor do you think that is for a lot of people to get into areas like these? And what would have happened if you didn't have that in the very beginning?
So I definitely think that in a lot of successful science stories, that they really got into the field because of a personal reason. And so because, for me at least, I draw a lot of my inspiration from my own personal life. Like with water pollution, I do that because I do a lot of outdoorsy activities. And so if I hadn't had that close family die of pancreatic cancer, I actually don't know if I would be sitting here because maybe I wouldn't have gone into pancreatic cancer. Maybe I would have instead gone to some other disease or done some other project.
Sure.
And so you never really know. However, one thing that definitely did motivate me in the lab was that 100 people die of pancreatic cancer every single day. And so when I would go into the lab, I'd think, how am I going to help save 100 lives today? So it was a combination of both that close family friend passing as well as those 100, that kind of statistic that drove me on throughout my research.
Is that like the main motivator? Like you go into the lab, as you mentioned, right, with an idea, I'm going to help save people's lives.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the greatest things I see about science, especially in medicine, is that my results are directly applicable to help saving people's lives, and that it can potentially save the world. I mean, for me, my success isn't really measured by how much money I have or how many different conferences I can go to. It's measured instead by how many different lives I can change and how many lives people I can inspire to get into science. And so through this project, I'm hoping that I can help save as many lives as possible. So that's why I'm currently working with these different companies about getting it on the market as soon as possible.
Okay. One question related to how do you actually secure your technology? So like patents, how do you work?
Yeah, so currently I have the international patent on the technology, and I'm in talks with 6 different companies about getting it on the market as soon as possible.
Okay. I think that's about it. If you have any other messages, the problem in Lithuania is lots of people don't choose science as a subject to study in later, like college or like PhDs. What would be your message and the reason why people in the audience right here are the ones that are about to choose a college just like you are? Why should they choose science? What's the motivator for that?
So I think that you should go with whatever you're passionate about. However, I'm going to make the case for science here. And the reason I think that science is probably the best thing ever is because it allows you to explore your surrounding environment and explain things that we might not be able to understand. And the excitement and thrill of being able to solve a problem and be the very first one to see those results is inexplicable. For me, I don't think there's a parallel to that in the humanities such as English. Unfortunately, you aren't going to be able to find the next cure to cancer, help save someone's lives. And so that's the thing about science, is that you can help save lives or explore unknown worlds that were before unseen by humans. And so I think that's the coolest thing, is that every day you can help change the world.
Okay, I think it couldn't get any more motivating than that. Fantastic socks, and on that note, we'll end this. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
We'll be back at 2 p.m. with another talk. Thanks.